Before you pray again, you need to hear this. Before you pray again, pause. Not because prayer is wrong, not because you have failed. Pause because repeating words without awareness slowly drains the soul, and you may already feel that drain, even if you have never named it. This is not a correction. It is an invitation to notice what has been happening inside you every time you fold your hands, lower your head, and say the same things with less expectation than before. Think about how quickly prayer has become your reflex, something you do automatically when life feels heavy, confusing, or out of control. You pray because you believe. You pray because you were taught to. You pray because it feels safer than sitting with unanswered questions. But there is a difference between prayer that flows from connection and prayer that rises from tension. One restores you, the other quietly exhausts you. You may not say this out loud, but part of you feels it. The subtle frustration after praying and standing up unchanged. The quiet disappointment you push aside by telling yourself to be grateful. The way your words keep going while your heart stays guarded. This is not a lack of faith. It is a signal that something in your inner posture needs attention before your words do. Cartesian clarity begins with doubt, not to destroy truth, but to remove illusion. And here is the illusion many sincere believers live with, that more words automatically mean deeper prayer. They do not. Awareness precedes meaning. Presence precedes transformation. Without awareness, prayer becomes motion without direction, sound without listening, effort without rest. You are not being asked to stop praying. You are being asked to stop rushing into prayer as if God can only hear you when you speak. Silence is not the enemy of prayer. Unexamined habit is. When prayer turns into repetition without reflection, it no longer connects you. It distracts you from what your soul is trying to surface. Notice how uncomfortable it feels to pause. That discomfort reveals something important. It shows how much you rely on words to manage uncertainty, how quickly you reach for requests instead of understanding, how rarely you arrive before you ask. This is not a flaw, it is human, but growth begins when you observe it honestly. Before you pray again, you need to hear this, because the issue is not unanswered prayers, it is unheard awareness. Something in you is trying to shift from effort to alignment, from urgency to presence, from speaking to listening. And if you rush past this moment, you will keep praying from the same place, expecting a different experience. Stay with this pause. It is not empty, it is diagnostic. It reveals where your faith has become tired, where hope has thinned, and where trust is ready to mature. What comes next will only make sense if you allow this moment to settle first. There is a frustration many believers carry that rarely gets spoken. It hides behind faithful language and disciplined habits, but it shows up in the body and the tone of the prayers themselves. You keep asking with sincerity, yet each time you finish, something feels unresolved. Not dramatic, just heavy, as if hope keeps showing up, but understanding never quite does. You may notice that your prayers sound the same, but your expectations have quietly lowered. You still believe God can act, yet you no longer feel surprised when nothing changes. This creates a strange inner tension. You are faithful, but also disappointed, trusting, yet guarded. And because disappointment feels uncomfortable in spiritual spaces, you swallow it and call it patience. Smiling faith is exhausting. It requires you to silence honest emotions in order to appear steady. You say the right things. You encourage others. You remind yourself to stay thankful. But inside, you are tired of hoping without clarity. Tired of asking without understanding what is really happening. Tired of pretending that unanswered questions do not affect your heart. This kind of exhaustion is not caused by prayer itself. It is caused by unresolved meaning. When the heart keeps reaching for answers that the mind cannot yet process, fatigue sets in. not because you lack devotion, but because you lack orientation. You are moving spiritually, but without a clear sense of direction. There is also guilt layered into this frustration. Guilt for feeling tired when you know prayer is a gift. Guilt for questioning when you believe you should trust. Guilt for wanting more than endurance. So instead of slowing down, you push harder, you pray longer. You repeat yourself, and each repetition increases the weight you are hoping to release. Most people are not tired of praying, they are tired of hoping without understanding, they are tired of carrying spiritual effort without emotional alignment, and until that misalignment is acknowledged, prayer will continue to feel like something you perform instead of something that restores you. This frustration is not a sign you are doing something wrong. It is a sign that your faith is asking to deepen, to move beyond repetition into awareness, to move from obligation into relationship. And that shift begins when you stop ignoring the weight and start listening to what it is pointing toward. There is a subtle shift that happens when prayer stops feeling like a conversation and starts feeling like noise. Not loud noise, but constant noise. Words filling the space before you even notice what you are trying to avoid. This is not intentional. It is protective. When silence feels uncomfortable, speech becomes a shield. Many people talk at God instead of with God, not out of disrespect, but out of fear. Fear of what might surface if they stop speaking. Fear of thoughts they have not given permission to exist. Fear that silence might reveal doubt, anger, or disappointment they believe they should not feel. So they keep praying, filling every gap with words, hoping volume will replace vulnerability. Prayer can quietly become a coping mechanism, a way to manage anxiety rather than engage relationship, a way to feel active when waiting feels unbearable. In this state, prayer is less about connection and more about control. If you keep talking, you do not have to listen. If you keep asking, you do not have to sit with uncertainty, but connection requires space. Listening cannot happen in constant output. When prayer is only speech, it loses its relational depth. It becomes monologue instead of dialogue. And over time, the soul senses this imbalance. That is when prayer starts to feel empty, repetitive, or strangely distant, even though the words remain sincere. Sometimes the loudest prayers are covering the deepest fears, not because those fears are wrong, but because they have not been acknowledged. Silence threatens to expose what words are hiding, and yet silence is where awareness grows, where truth clarifies, where real connection begins. This does not mean you need to pray less. It means you need to listen more honestly, to allow space for what arises without immediately correcting it with religious language. God is not unsettled by your unfiltered thoughts. What interrupts connection is not honesty, but avoidance. When prayer becomes noise, the invitation is not to stop praying, but to change how you arrive. Less performing, less managing, more presence. Because what you are really seeking is not a response you can hear, but a relationship you can feel, and that requires a different posture than you may be used to. There is a difference between asking and arriving, and most people never notice when their prayers stay stuck in asking. Asking is urgent. It reaches forward. It tries to move God toward a result. Arriving is different. Arriving means you show up as you are, aware of where you stand, without rushing to change the moment. One posture leans on effort, the other rests on trust. Many prayers are sincere but tense. They are shaped by urgency, fear, or the pressure to fix something quickly. The words may be faithful, but the posture underneath them is strained. You pray as if something depends entirely on you, saying the right thing with the right tone at the right time. Over time, that posture teaches your body and mind to associate prayer with pressure instead of peace. Posture matters more than wording because posture reveals intent. Are you praying to control outcomes, or are you praying to remain aligned while outcomes unfold? Are you arriving to be present, or are you arriving to negotiate? These questions are uncomfortable because they expose how much effort we bring into spaces meant for trust. When prayer is rooted in urgency, it narrows awareness. You focus only on what is missing, what is broken, what needs to change. That focus trains the heart to stay restless. But when prayer begins from rest, awareness widens. You can still desire change, but you are no longer consumed by it. You can ask without grasping. This is why two people can pray the same words and have completely different experiences. One is pushing, the other is present. One is trying to move something, the other is allowing something to work. God responds to posture before he responds to requests, because posture determines how a response will be received. Arriving does not mean you stop asking. It means you stop rushing past presence to get to results. It means you recognize that connection comes before correction. That relationship comes before resolution. When you arrive first, your prayers become less frantic and more honest, less demanding and more grounded. This shift is subtle, but it changes everything. Because once you notice posture, you realize why prayer has felt heavy. Not because God was distant, but because you were carrying more tension into prayer than you realized. And that awareness prepares you for a question that reshapes the entire experience. There is a question that does not rush you, but it does not leave you untouched either. It sits quietly beneath the surface of your prayers, waiting for the moment you are willing to hear it without defensiveness. What if the reason prayer feels heavy is not because nothing is happening, but because something inside you needs realignment before answers can land? This question is unsettling because it shifts the focus. It moves attention away from outcomes and toward orientation, away from what you want to change and toward how you are standing while you wait. It suggests that clarity is not always withheld, but sometimes delayed until the heart is positioned to receive it without distortion. Alignment is not about perfection. It is about honesty, about noticing where fear has been directing your prayers instead of trust, where urgency has replaced presence, where expectation has turned into quiet pressure. None of this makes your prayers wrong. It simply reveals the condition they are coming from. When the heart is misaligned, even good answers can feel confusing. Even relief can feel temporary. That is why realignment often comes before resolution. Not as a test, but as preparation. It stabilizes you so that whatever comes next does not overwhelm or unravel you. This is where Cartesian clarity meets spiritual growth. To examine the foundations before building conclusions, to question assumptions without abandoning faith, to recognize that not every delay is external. Some delays are internal invitations to shift perspective. You do not need to force alignment. Forcing would contradict the very thing alignment requires. Awareness is enough to begin. Simply noticing where your prayers have been coming from changes how you pray next. It softens effort, it reduces resistance, it creates space for trust to re-enter naturally. Let this question remain open. Do not rush to answer it. Its purpose is not to accuse you, but to guide you. Because once alignment begins, prayer no longer feels like weight. It feels like grounding, and that opens the way for a different experience of response altogether. This is where the focus narrows, not to a concept, but to you. Because behind all of this is not a theory about prayer, but a person who has been praying quietly, often late at night when the world finally stops asking things of you. Those prayers are shorter now, not because you care less, but because expectation feels risky. You choose words carefully. You avoid asking too much. You protect yourself from disappointment before it can form. You may speak to God in fragments, in thoughts that begin but never fully finish. You pray while lying awake, staring into the dark, unsure whether you want an answer or just reassurance. There is a part of you that wants to be honest, but another part that is afraid of what honesty might uncover. Silence feels close in those moments, not empty, but heavy with meaning. You are not afraid that God will not hear you. You are afraid of what silence might mean, afraid it confirms what you have been trying not to believe. Afraid it means you have misunderstood something important, so you keep your prayers measured, safe, manageable. You ask without fully opening your heart, because full openness feels like too much risk. This does not make you weak. It makes you aware of how much you care, aware of how deeply you want alignment between what you believe and what you experience. That awareness can feel lonely when it is not shared, but it is also the doorway to a more honest connection. God is not waiting for you to sound confident. He is not impressed by polished words. What draws closeness is sincerity without performance, the willingness to be seen without controlling the outcome. Even fear, when acknowledged, becomes a form of prayer. You are allowed to speak honestly without knowing how God will respond. Relationship does not require certainty. It requires presence. And presence begins when you stop managing the conversation and allow yourself to be fully known in it. This is not about fixing your prayers. It is about letting them become real again, and that prepares the ground for understanding response in a way you may not have considered yet. What if the response you have been waiting for has not been an answer, but a nearness you have been overlooking? We often measure response by change, by movement, by resolution. But relationship is not proven by speed. It is proven by presence. And presence does not always announce itself with solutions. There are moments when God does not step in to fix quickly, not because he is distant, but because he is staying close. Close enough to steady you. Close enough to let you grow aware instead of dependent. Answers can solve a moment. Presence reshapes a person, and reshaping takes time. We are taught subtly to treat prayer like a transaction. We bring requests, we expect results. When results delay, we assume silence. But silence is not the same as absence. Sometimes it is attentiveness without interruption, a listening that does not rush to correct, a closeness that allows you to feel what needs to be felt instead of escaping it. Growth that lasts rarely comes from dramatic intervention. It comes from awareness that deepens over time, from learning how to remain grounded even when circumstances stay uncertain, from realizing that faith is not built by constant reassurance, but by learning to trust presence when reassurance is not immediate. God does not always respond with solutions, because solutions can bypass transformation. If every discomfort were removed instantly, awareness would never mature. Relationship would remain shallow. So sometimes the response is not a change in situation, but a change in how supported you feel within it. This is not neglect. It is care that respects your capacity to grow. Care that allows you to experience trust, not just believe in it. When you begin to recognize response as closeness instead of outcome, prayer shifts again. It becomes less about waiting for something to happen and more about noticing what already is. And once response is understood this way, prayer no longer feels unanswered. It feels accompanied. That understanding prepares you for a different kind of prayer, one with fewer words and far more truth. Let this next moment feel different from what you are used to. This is not a prayer where you ask for outcomes or explain yourself carefully. This is a reset, a return to simplicity, fewer words, more truth. Not spoken to impress, but to align. You are not entering this moment to get something. You are entering it to be honest. Begin with honesty without performance. Notice what is actually present in you right now, not what you think should be present. Maybe there is fatigue, maybe resistance, maybe trust mixed with doubt. Do not organize it. Do not correct it. Just acknowledge it. Awareness itself is already a form of prayer. Truth does not need to be polished to be received. Now allow surrender to replace control. Surrender is not resignation. It is the decision to stop gripping what you cannot manage anyway. The effort to control often hides fear. When control loosens, fear becomes visible, and that visibility is healing. You are not handing everything over dramatically. You are simply admitting that you were never meant to carry it all with tension. As control releases, notice the space that opens. That space is not emptiness, it is availability. Availability for clarity, availability for presence, availability for support that does not require you to perform first. Stay with that space long enough to feel its steadiness. This is where prayer begins to restore instead of exhaust. Now, allow trust without timelines to settle in. Trust that does not demand speed. Trust that does not negotiate. Trust that rests in the belief that growth is happening even when outcomes remain unclear. This trust is quiet. It does not argue. It does not rush ahead. It stays rooted in the present moment, grounded in the reality that you are not alone in this. Notice how different this feels from usual prayer. There is less urgency, less pressure to say the right thing, more permission to simply be. This is not passive, it is deeply intentional. It aligns your inner posture with relationship rather than transaction. Remain here longer than feels natural. The mind will want to move on, to do something, to ask for something. Resist that impulse gently. Stillness is not avoidance. It is participation. It allows what is already present to surface and settle. This kind of prayer does not end with a conclusion. It ends with steadiness. And steadiness carries into everything that follows. When prayer becomes alignment instead of effort, you leave it clearer, not because circumstances changed, but because you did. This is not a call to act. It is an invitation to notice. Before you pray again today, before words form out of habit, allow yourself one quiet moment of arrival. Sit without fixing anything. Let awareness come before requests. This small pause changes the direction of prayer more than longer speeches ever could. You do not need to make a promise or start a new routine. Just remember this shift the next time you feel the urge to pray quickly. Instead of filling the space immediately, stay with it. Let presence lead. Let listening come first. This is how prayer becomes relationship again, not obligation. If something in this message resonated, you may feel the urge to acknowledge it. Not publicly, not dramatically, but honestly. A simple inner agreement is enough. Some people choose to type a few words like "I'm listening," not to declare anything, but to mark awareness, to say even quietly that they are willing to approach prayer differently. There is no pressure here. Reflection is more powerful when it is chosen freely. What matters is not what you type or say, but what you remember the next time you pause before praying. That memory will guide you back to presence. This moment is not meant to end with this video. It is meant to change how the next moment begins. You don't need better words when you pray. You don't need longer prayers, stronger emotions, or perfect timing. What you need is a quieter heart. A heart that is no longer rushing ahead of awareness, no longer speaking to avoid listening, no longer trying to control what can only be trusted. Prayer was never meant to be heavy. It becomes heavy when it turns into effort instead of encounter, when it becomes performance instead of presence, when it carries pressure instead of peace. The shift you felt here is not emotional, it is structural. It changes how you arrive, not what you say. God is already closer than you think, not waiting for you to say the right thing, not measuring your consistency, not withholding himself until you get it right. Closeness has been constant. Awareness is what changes. Carry this with you the next time you pray. Pause first. Arrive fully. Let listening come before asking. Let presence replace pressure. That is where prayer begins to restore what effort has been draining. This is not the end of a message. It is the beginning of a different way of being present.